Hey, my name is Matt Storr and I repair saxophones for a living, and today I'd like to show you the original setup on an SML gold medal or revision D, since they're basically the same horn. This is a beautiful tenor that's in original condition, and it has all of its original pads and materials. The only thing that I can tell that is non-original about it is that the neck has been damaged. Looks like here, this probably got pulled down a little bit and pushed in. I can feel a little bit of a dent in the back. It's fairly common damage for these. They've got a really stout brace here, but it has a relatively small area where it's actually like attached to the neck. So if it ever does like take force this way, it typically pushes in here. It's unfortunate. If they made a wider foot, it might be a little more resilient. But it looks like that has been repaired and somebody resoldered the neck tenon. Not exactly sure why they would have done the entire neck tenon for that kind of damage when there's not like much pull down damage evident. I mean, usually if it was pulled down that badly, you'd see like a lot of crackling in the lacquer here. Maybe this just got pushed in a little bit and separated it, and they tried to reflow solder and were unsuccessful, so they took it off and put it back on. Anyhow, there's the octave key. You can see pretty thin pad there. That's what that shape looks like. As far as the horn itself, there's two types of engraving you'll see on these. This is the much more ornate version. You get engraving inside the bell, which you don't see on many of these, definitely not all, but this like more elaborate engraving is fairly rare. So starting with the bell keys, we can see we've got, pretty thin pads. That's what your heights are looking like. This has pretty large resonators. They come with smaller resonators sometimes. This is one of the like sort of larger sizes that I usually see, and they're flat and they're riveted. You can see on the materials there for the B flat and the B, they've just got cork going against those little rollers there. It doesn't work super well. It works okay. I mean, feeling it right now, feels pretty good, honestly. There's not a whole lot of slide. Let's see. There's a little bit, but not much. I think if I wanted to make this feel just a tiny bit better, I might use the same materials, but laminated with a little bit of Teflon. But honestly, that feels pretty darn good. On the lower stack, you can see thin pads, moderate key heights, maybe even moderate low, not super high. We've got red felts on the bottom of these adjustment screws here. Around the back side, it's a little bit harder to see, but we'll go up under here. We can see we've got cork on the top and bottom of the foot on the F here. Now, these adjustment screws, I've never actually seen them like used a whole lot. It seems like you want to set it up with them set flush, and then if over time things compress, you can screw that in a little bit. But those screws are so small, especially with like any sort of normal, like non super hard material. The head of that screw, or not the head, I guess it's the shaft of the screw that's going to be impinging upon the cork there. It's such a small surface area that it's just going to compress. So you don't typically see those being used a whole lot. So I typically just set them up flat and, flush with the bottom of that arm there. And then, if it needs to be tightened, it can. Now, this has been bent a little bit. Usually this is a little higher. You can see the bend here, but it's kind of a flimsy piece of material, and that kind of happens a lot on these, but typically that would be up a little higher. And you can also see this material here, it's pretty thin. That cork on both sides is pretty thin, and a lot of times you might do yourself a favor, if it's in original condition, to bend those keys open just a little bit so you can have a little more material there and keep it from being loud over time. Now, not too much, but just a little bit. See, for the low C, there's our key height. Low C sharp is opening this much. We've got these like adjustable bumpers here, adjustable bumper felts. You can see them on the low B and B flat. I typically adjust them so they're pretty close to bottomed out. Now, it might be kind of hard to see. Let's see if we can get a view of it. There we go. But there's like a disc of felt behind them. So these things screw out, and then you put a disc of felt behind it, a piece of felt in the adjustable bumper, but that disc of felt keeps it from being noisy. If it's screwed most of the way in, it can kind of rattle, and those discs there were original materials, and those are designed to keep it from being too noisy. See our E flat, that's actually been crushed, so that's not going to tell us much. This key guard is often crushed on these. You can take it off and straighten it out, not a huge deal. F sharp that's missing its material, actually. That's typically going to be around here, that height, just about even with the top of that. The top of the pad cup is going to be even with the top of that guard there. Now the side C and side B flat, we've got some like red tubing here, cork on the bottom. There's that height. There's that height. Now obviously you can adjust this for intonation, but that's kind of where they're starting off. And this pad might not be original. And then for the octave key, we've got the red tubing again. We've got big chunk of cork down here. And that is original, even though it looks a little bit chunky. That's what those looked like. I typically put just a disc rather than like having it come up a little bit. It just kind of looks, I don't know, a little bit more refined that way, I think. For the G, where it touches the top of the octave, they just have a thin piece of cork. I typically will bend that a little bit farther open and put some felt on there so it gets a little bit less of that going on over time. We can see the back of the upper stack here. We've got cork on the bottom and very thin cork. Yeah, it's like really thin. It's kind of hard to see. Very thin cork on the top. And I would probably want something a little bit thicker personally. That's going to be noisy. A little bit thicker down here on the A. But you can see those nice blued screws. A lot of times those are rusted out. These look really, really good. Just this has not seen a lot of use. And we see we've got red felt underneath the A and the front F. We see the left-hand pinky table, how that's set, the spacing, the flatness, gorgeous. And there's the little switch for the C sharp and G sharp automatic. Let's see, looks like that's a little loose. So this is typically a little tighter. That's kind of loose. There's a screw under there that's probably coming out. But that switches that way, and then the C sharp activates the G sharp, switches out of the way, and it does not. Kind of a handy feature to have, but typically that's tighter. And there's a piece of cork on the bottom of that that's kind of snugged up and acts as the adjustment material when it's clicked out, and acts as like a silencer and keeps it in place when it's on the G sharp. Now for the palm keys, the F looks like it's been bent a little bit. I think that's probably a bit more open than it would normally be. It's probably right around there normally, and it's going there. But the E flat and the D look like they're about original. And again, you can really see those thin pads deep in those cups there. And they just have cork on the bottom. For the front F, they've got a little tiny piece of material on the arm here, and a little tiny piece of material under the arm here to make that adjustment. The G sharp, kind of hard to see from here, but it's got a, there it is, mechanism that has a little bit of slide in it. Originally they just had cork there, especially cork with cork grease actually works pretty good for sliding adjustments, but again, I'd probably be laminating that with cork when I redo it. One thing that's kind of evident here underneath all of the dirt is those beautiful gold-plated springs that they put on these, and they are just lovely, and they are pretty much the same length throughout the instrument for every key, which means everything has a very, very even action, which is really, really great. Oh, I just noticed some more damage underneath there. That's peeled up a little bit. So I would imagine that this got hit, and so probably that's why this is bent, that's peeled up, and it's pulling away from right here. Not a huge deal, something we can fix. But let's get a better look at those pads there. You can see the resonators are more moderate size on the stack here. You can see they are pretty deep seated inside those pad cups, thin pads, and when they close, right about there, right? I would imagine once I get this side E fixed, this horn will probably play pretty well. Oh, and on the octave mechanism, I forgot. They have it set up originally where there's like this sort of the same soft red tubing they've got elsewhere on the rocker arm of the octave key. I actually typically take that stuff off, make sure that those are clean underneath, and then I actually put inside the cradles here, I put like a tiny piece of, or a very like thin piece of cork laminated with Teflon, or maybe leather laminated with Teflon. That's just a personal choice. I think you can do it either way, but like that's just something that I typically do on these. Oh, and I guess we'll look at the heights on the upper stack, although they're fairly well informed by the bis connection there, right? You can't really like go too far out of the way with these fixed bars on the F sharp, but that is what the upper stack looks like. Moderate openings. The G is a bit high because that cork is compressed. It's probably originally, let's see, sorry, probably originally around there. Just a little bit more closed. So that is the original setup on an old SML Revision D or gold medal tenor. The materials are basically the same on the altos. Obviously the heights and stuff are going to be different, but that's a pretty good example of what, oh, and I guess I forgot there's the little piece of cork for the low C sharp, but I think I got pretty much everything else. That should be a pretty good example of how these are originally set up, the original intent. A lot of times when people see these horns for repair, they've been damaged, they've been bent all over the place, someone's tried to use the wrong thickness of pads and has changed the geometry on the horn, and getting the geometry back to where it's supposed to be does an awful lot for making it much easier to do a good overhaul and getting the work to get out of the way so that the saxophone is just the saxophone versus the overhaul. So hopefully you found this helpful, useful, and informative. My name is Matt Storr. I repair saxophones for a living. Thanks for watching.